before we get into Daniel, before I get too far away from Jeremiah 39. So Jeremiah 39 is the siege. Jerusalem is captured. And there was a guy that we read about a lot, Nebuzaradan. He was the captain of the bodyguard, and he did a lot of interacting with Jeremiah. In Jeremiah 39, verse 1, when Jerusalem was captured in the 9th year of Zedekiah, king of Judah, in the 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, and all his army came to Jerusalem and laid siege to it. And in the 11th year of Zedekiah, in the 4th month, in the 9th day of the month, the city wall was breached. Then all the officials of the king of Babylon came in and sat down at the middle gate. Nergal-Sarezer, Samgar-Nebu, Sar-Sekim the Rab-Saris, Nergal-Sarezer the Rab-Mag, and all the rest of the officials of the king of Babylon. If you look at that list, you will see the second name ends in Nebu, or your third name begins in Nebu. But what I really want you to look at is the Sar-Sekim, because all of you have something like Sar-Sekim. Do you see Sar-Sekim? I don't know who gave me this newspaper cutout. Anytime after 2007, because that's how old it is. I don't know if it was, Miss Rhonda does not have any memory of handing me this cutout, although she has handed me cutouts in the past. Tablet linked to obscure Old Testament figure discovered. It's doubtful that many Christians remember the name Nebu-Sar-Sekim from the reading of the Old Testament. Now, we can read this whole article, and I'm not going to read the whole thing. Actually, it's easier for me to read it right here. But you'll see this guy's name, Nebu-Shashshukam, who is called in the Bible the chief king of Nebuchadnezzar. And here, if you have the NASB, you'll have a footnote that calls him the chief official. Okay, so you'll read in articles like this that these old names these Babylonian names are difficult, these titles and these names are difficult to translate, right? That's why the New King James has the NASB has Sar-Sekim the Rab-Saris with a footnote saying an official, which others will have a footnote saying the eunuch. The Nebu, which attaches this word, this prefix here, is actually in these two versions a suffix of the previous name. Nebu-Sar-Sekim the Rab-Saris, Nebu-Sar-Sekim the chief officer. Okay, so this dude, it's doubtful that many Christians remember this name from reading the Old Testament, but thanks to archaeological discovery in the British Museum, they may in the future. British Museum officials announced recently, and this is 2007, the discovery of a 2-inch wide, 2,500-year-old cuneiform tablet that contains detail of a financial transaction by this guy, who is called in the tablet the chief eunuch of Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar. That's the same person mentioned in Jeremiah 39:3, although spelled differently. Conservative Bible, if you guys are following along and done this next paragraph, conservative biblical scholars say it's another affirmation that the Bible is true, even in the smallest of details, such as names. I'm going to start with this underlining here, the far underlining. The tablet, the whole paragraph, the tablet actually dates from 595 BC, which is right around the time of the destruction, right? Several years prior to the siege of Jerusalem. It would have been made by pressing an object into clay. The tablet reads, according to the Telegraph, regarding 1.5 minas of gold, the property of this guy, the chief eunuch, which he sent via Arad-Banitu, the eunuch, to the temple. Arad-Banitu has delivered it to Esengaliah in the presence of Bel-Usat, the son of Alpiah, the royal bodyguard, and of Nadin, son of Marduk, Zer-Ebni, month 11, day 18, year 10 of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. So somebody uncovered it. That wasn't in the Bible, but we read two names there in the Bible around the same time. That's pretty impressive. That's what this article is saying. This article says, now I'm going to read this chapter, or this paragraph right here. He says, this is a fantastic discovery, a world-class find, the British Museum's Irving Finkel said. If Secum existed, which other lesser figures in the Old Testament existed? I put the emphasis in the wrong syllable there. If he existed, which others existed is the question. Two-way detail in the Old Testament turns out to be accurate and true. I think that means that the whole of the narrative of Jeremiah takes on a new kind of power. No, Jeremiah always had the same kind of power. When this Bible, which was not written in a vacuum, you read, go dig, baby, dig. And it always, this little here it pops up, there it pops up in other places. I don't know who did. Does anybody read it? I have no idea. Maybe I read it, but
what paper?
National News, B and R. No, you know what B and R might be is biblical. I don't know. No, I have no idea what it is. Of course, it's It's got something from Washington. They're looking for a first church in Bells, Tennessee. Cookeville, Tennessee. But by then we had moved away, so I don't know, folks, who get. Probably a firm with Bucksworth. Very nice. Now, here, and you need to have this very important view. The outline of Daniel in a minute. Verses 1 through 14, vision. There are four kingdoms. The king of the fourth kingdom, quote, Son of Man is given an eternal kingdom, and the saints receive the kingdom. Quotes verse 13 in Matthew 26:64. They calling, tell us if you're the Son of God. And he says, you said it, and from hereafter you will see, and he quotes this, the Son of Man coming on the clouds, and that's where they say, of any other witnesses, blasphemy, kill him. That's the last thing. We don't have to wonder when it was fulfilled. Jesus says from here on. Verses 15 through 27, an inspired explanation with some more detail. The king of the fourth kingdom, of the fourth kingdom, will persecute God's people. Daniel to be alarmed. And further to say, read the text. There's going to be some persecution of the people in that time, but they're going to times that's there's persecution. They receive the kingdom, or the son receives the kingdom, and there's persecution of the king, but in the end they receive. The subjects of the kingdom will first be persecuted. This is somewhat new information. But everybody was reading these prophecies. They great, we're going to be home free, persecution, because that's the picture God is. He says, actually, that's it's going to go. Layers of information. Finally, compared to back through history, Daniel sees, John sees a beast already taken place. Chapter 17 in Revelation, same beast with the horns. You end up in both Daniel 7 and verse 17. And then in of Revelation, at the end of the 1,000 years, the saints are reigning with Christ. Right? They receive the Son receives. They're persecuted. They receive a kingdom, they receive a kingdom, they receive a kingdom. The saints win in the end. That's chapter 7. No questions from chapter 7. Up to today's chapter 8. First, I want to review the outline. In verses 1 and 2, there's an introduction. Daniel's location. He's in Susa. He's not actually in Babylon. He's about 400 miles to the east in Susa. Verses 3 through 14, there's a vision of a ram and a male goat, Medo-Persian. Wonder, who's this? Verses 15 through 26, there's an explanation. Persecution of... Remember this. Persecution of God's people. You guys read this. I know you read this before we came, so some of you didn't like the questions, which means that pointed to... Verse 27, Daniel... God's people are persecuted. Point number, before we get even into the text, I want to make 2 points. The first point is this. Not all of God's message is faithful, or gets the message and he's sick. That's not from happiness, right? That's bad news. In Acts chapter 2, when they heard the message, like they had been stabbed. That's pretty severe. That's emphatically horrible. David, although he knew this news for us, in David chapter 12, 2 Samuel chapter 12, Nathan comes to him and says, what? And you read from the Psalms and other places, he had been feeling horrible all the time. He's confronted with it. This is not, quote-unquote, what we call good news. Jonah, in chapter 3, he went to the Ninevites and he said, y'all are wonderful people. Keep doing... They were sick. Actually, the word isn't sick. It's nowhere around there. But they were repenting in sackcloth and ashes. That's not fun stuff. Ezra and Nehemiah, in their days, the men had foreign wives. Talk about a toughie. Nobody doubts. I mean, that ripped families apart. But God's good news was, you got a problem here, and you've got to rectify it. So, before we get any further, persecution of God's people is another one of those. It's not all quote-unquote good news. I know the whole context is, right? We know this. Then Daniel ends up sick. He sees that God's people are going to go through this. It's bad. Daniel was exhausted and sick for days. He was astounded by it. Do you remember when Hezekiah, on the other end of all this catastrophe, Hezekiah is sick, he's healed, he shows the Babylonians. Isaiah comes to him and says what?
You made a serious mistake.
Big mistake. And what's going to happen is those people you just showed all your stuff to, they're going to come here someday, destroy this country, and take your family as servants. And Hezekiah was sick to the stomach, wasn't he?
These won't happen in my day.
That's what he said. I mean, to take that at face value, which I don't know how else to take it, he's like, I'm sure he wouldn't have preferred that, but that's not the reaction that Daniel had. Daniel has a reaction, I am sick. Am I Hezekiah? Yeah, so I hear the Christian over there, that Christian's sick. At least it didn't happen to my... Right now, Bosworth family is apparently sick, puking at home. At least it's not happening to my family. That would be the same kind of... We can't have that, right? Being sympathetic for others. All right. We haven't even started in the text. Comment or question?
Unfortunately, the sickness is better than the alternative, because the sickness comes from a mature sense of regret that says, I can't blame anyone else. Anger is not appropriate. This is not a point at which lying would help. It never helps. When you make poor choices, there's going to be a regrettable emotion. At least let it be a righteous one.
Yeah.
I think there's a also with being in there. You can have a dream, you can have a nightmare. Sometimes people have night terrors,
Yeah.
which are, the equivalent again, I guess.
Yeah.
I've never had it myself. But there are times where you wake
You
up
wake
from a
up.
nightmare and you're just exhausted. You're sweating from
Yeah.
what is going on in your mind and everything. And he's seen the vision and gotten the explanation of it too.
Right.
And he's exhausted afterwards.
And it even says for days.
Yeah.
And hasn't he been expecting that with the period of exile up, things were going to start resolving themselves?
See, if you read the Old Testament prophecies up till now, you're
gonna
thinking,
get that.
hey, it's about to get better.
Was it him that counted, or was it somebody else?
Well, Jeremiah said it'll be 70 years. He reads it. I don't know what
It's
you
Daniel that reads it.
Yeah.
It's Daniel that reads it and go, oh, 70 years is all.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
at this
right.
point, he's got a
Yeah, he's down to
picture.
13. Now
And
he's down to
He's
whatever.
going to be experiencing disappointment.
10 years.
Severe
Right.
disappointment.
Right. Yeah, that's huge. That's very. Okay, so Daniel chapter 8, verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Belshazzar, more about this in a second, Belshazzar, the king, a vision appeared to me. Okay, remember chapters 7 through 12 are visions to Daniel. Chapters 1 through 6, sometimes Daniel is interpreting a vision that somebody else had, and it's relevant to that person and to us. But now, Daniel is receiving the vision himself. Daniel, subsequent to the one which appeared to me previously, more about that. Verse 2, I looked in the vision while I was in the citadel of Susa, which is in the province of Elam. And I looked in the vision, and I myself was beside the Ulai canal. Then I lifted my eyes and looked, and behold, a ram which had 2 horns was standing in front of the canal. Now the 2 horns were long, but one was longer than the other. So we have a lopsided, and the longer one coming up last. We have a lopsided face here. We don't have to wonder about who this is. In verse 20, the ram, we are told, represents Media and Persia. In chapter 7, the bear was raised up on one side. We had a lopsided bear. Here we have a lopsided ram with the stronger horn coming up last. The Medes and the Persians, up until now, are somewhat related peoples. You can trace that in history. And the Medes were greater than the... When we look at the map of history, we actually usually say who? The Persians. But whenever we say it, if we say them together, who do we say first? Like Ephraim and Manasseh, right? We take the one that was greater initially, that had preeminence. Okay, so we have, but all that changed with Cyrus. More about that later. So a ram which had 2 hands was standing in front of the canal. Now the 2 horns were long, but one was longer than the other, and the longer was coming up last. Yes, Persia will now be greater, and the later one, Persia is later to show up on the scene, as it were, as the controlling half, coming up last. I saw the ram butting westward, so it's over here for you guys. It's in the east. It butts westward, and then what does it say next? Whichever. It's now southward. Look at me. Right? Southward and northward, although I forget. Westward, northward, and southward. No other beast could stand before him, nor is there anyone to rescue from his power. But he did as he pleased, and he magnified himself. While I was observing, behold, a male goat was coming from the west. Okay, so this dude was over here in the east going that way, taking over everything. This guy is coming from the west over the surface of the whole ground without touching the ground, and the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. He came up to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen in front of the canal, and rushed at him with his mighty wrath. I saw him once come beside the ram, and he was enraged at him, and struck the ram and shattered his 2 horns, and the ram had no strength to hurled him to the ground and trampled on him, and you can picture that. And there was none to rescue the ram from his, that is, the goat's power. Okay, we need to go back to this wonderful wonderful chart. Wait a minute. We need to go back to this wonderful, wonderful chart. And we need to do this. Here we are, the third year of Belshazzar, which is in 549 BC. Next time you're doing your math, okay? It's 549 BC. Remember that number. Does anybody know what else happened that's really significant in 549 BC? Okay, we'll get to it in just a second. I don't expect you to remember it. I do because I'm a nerd. Okay. All right, we've got to do some catch up here. Okay? Here's our wonderful chart. Nabopolassar rebels against Assyria in 627, but Nebuchadnezzar, he starts reigning down here. We're still in the, well, actually, no, we're not. We're out of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. We've already covered Daniel 4. We need to remember that Buddha came to be around 563 BC. Okay. So other people that reign in Babylon, Marduk, Nergal-Sarezer, and these dudes, Nabonidus, we'll read a little bit about him. Jehoiakim is released from prison in 561. We've already read that, so we're just catching up so far. Daniel 7, we studied that last week, 552. And then, where am I? Oh, Confucius is born around 551. And then, what's happening? Daniel 8, 549. So we're caught up. Pay attention now to what starts happening. What happens at 549 is, you have heard the story, whatever the story is, that is when Cyrus comes to power, and the Persians take over the Medes. Cyrus beats up, no matter what story you read, Cyrus beats up his grandfather. Okay. His grandfather is married to King Croesus of Lydia, his sister, I guess. I don't know if I have that right, but they're brother-in-laws. King Croesus of Lydia, over here, he's the rich guy. He hears that Cyrus has beaten up his grandfather, whom he's related to, so they're all actually related, and he consults the oracle. And he says, should I go and beat up Persia? And the oracle says, I paraphrase, if you do, a great nation will be destroyed. He goes, because he interprets that as the Persians are the great nation that will be destroyed. Who wins? Persia. Now, Cyrus defeats Croesus in 546 BC, 3 years after. Where is Lydia? You may or may not be aware of this. We call it Asia Minor. What did the Greeks call it? Greece. Okay, they considered Lydia part of Greece. So remember that, okay? Lydia and all this area down here. Ephesus, okay, all this area. All right, so Croesus is, and who loses? Greece does. To who? The ram that is budding westward. All right, so we got to keep on going in our little chart here. Where are we? So Cyrus is now reigning down here. Okay, so there's a Nabopolassar ends the Assyrians. Then there are the Babylonians, and now we have down here the Persians. Here's a list of kings. Okay, we got to catch up where we are. Daniel 8. So we're going into the future, but this is important because what we're dealing with is what Daniel is learning about in this prophecy. In 533 BC, Ezra, we're going to read a little bit about him. We're going to go back over here somewhere. Ezra, Haggai, Zechariah, we're going to read all about that stuff. Yes, we still got to get there. The Republic of Rome it changes from basically tyrants ruling to a king ruling. No, to a republic in 510. Okay, that's just in there for interesting facts for now. The Battle of Marathon. Who is in 490 BC? Who did what? Anybody know?
Is this the 300 soldiers?
No, that's Thermopylae.
Okay.
Okay, but where is Marathon? Where is Marathon?
Greece.
Greece. Who did what? Darius the Great comes over. Who won that one? Does anybody remember? Greece won. That's where the marathon. They ran to say either they need help and they got it, or they ran to say we won. One of the two. That's where marathon, our word marathon comes from and the idea. Okay, Greece won. Well, guess who got ticked off about that? Persia. But notice strike number 2 into the ram is budding westward. Well, what's next here on this chart? Esther. Esther's husband is a guy named Xerxes. He's the guy who will cross the Hellespont up there, and he builds a bridge out of the boats. And while he's building this bridge out of the boats, he starts to cross it, and the boats all are destroyed by weather. And so he gets upset, and he whips the water, literally whips the water and curses the water. That's the kind of guy that she's married to, which increases or helps us understand when she was going into him, she could have died because the man always lost his temper. Anyway, because Daddy lost in 10 years, he takes 10 years, or it's another 10 years, they equip and they go back to Thermopylae. Okay, so Thermopylae is in 480. Who wins at Thermopylae? The Persians win, the Grecians lose. Okay, so they lose. So here we go. They lose, they get picked on here, and they lose again. The Greece is losing, so that you can see the ram is budding backward. And what happens when you get picked on, by the way? If you're letting the flesh take over, what happens when you're picked on?
Fed up.
You get fed up. All right, so keep that in mind. Who's going where? Ezra 7 through 10. We still need to read that. We'll get there. Nehemiah is going to take place. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle are going to come into existence, and then Alexander the Great. Because what they're doing with Cyrus and Darius, and then later with Xerxes, who we'll read about, well, the Greeks are just ticked off. They're angry. And so we read here, the male goat is coming from the west. Over the surface of the whole earth. So, one person writes, the Alexander the Great unified the Greeks with rage over the way the Persians had been attacking them and meddling in their affairs for the previous 2 centuries. Okay? They've been attacking them. They're attacking. Alexander the even a Grecian, he's from Macedonia, right? He's from Macedon. But he comes down and he takes over and he unites all these little city-states, which are no longer city-states, and he says, hey, we've got something in common. They picked on us. And everybody there says, okay, let's go fight them. When they fight, so the real master actually talking about his father, Philip of Macedon, and how Philip of Macedon came down to Greece and beat up Greece. He writes, the real master of the art that is besieging cities. Remember how long it took Nebuchadnezzar besiege Tyre? 13 years.
13.
Yep. How long did Nebuchadnezzar besiege Jerusalem?
3.5.
Yeah, or 3 years, depending on how you're counting. At least a year and a half, right? Okay. The way that Philip of Macedon will besiege cities totally changes that. They have no time their resources are completely depleted. The real master of the art was Philip of Macedon. 11 cities are recorded as falling to him. What is so striking is the speed. He could take a city in double quick time before the Athenians could get. City-state was at hand. That's a comment about politics back in Greece. The end of the city-state is at hand in this time period, okay, that we're talking about. But, get what it said. He was fast, and his son took that and perfected it, and completely came across the... What am I doing? And he... over here into India, right? Even he goes into India, which is actually not pictured up there. Okay, so he goes that far. That's what he's doing. We're caught up in our text now. Verse 8. Then the male goat magnified himself exceedingly. He thought he was a god. He literally thought. He's one of the first ones to think, I'm a god. For a couple reasons. Number one, people were telling him that. And number two, nobody had done anything like he had done before. He so thought he was a god that he would jump over the walls in cities and take on villagers and cities single-handedly until his soldiers climbed over the wall and either helped him or dragged him back. But he thought he was a superhero. So he magnifies himself exceedingly, but as soon as he was mighty, remember how long he reigns for? About 11 years, 334 to 323, so 11 years. As soon as he was mighty, the large horn was broken. And in its place there came 4 conspicuous horns toward the 4 winds of heaven, which are the 4. He didn't have he did. The son's not born yet. He dies, and so his soldiers take over his generals. He's got 4. You'll notice up here there's 5 generals, okay? Because there's fighting going on, and it goes on for a couple hundred years. Then there's Antigonid Empire, the Ptolemaic, and the Seleucid. And then finally, down here, there's the Seleucid Empire, the Ptolemaic Empire. So it doesn't say it in here. In chapter 11, out of the Seleucid Empire is this guy who is called Antiochus Epiphanes IV. Out of one of them, I'm just going to tell you that everybody agrees that this is what we're talking about now is this guy called Antiochus Epiphanes. Out of one of them, that is out of the little horns, out of the Seleucid Empire, came forth a rather small horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the beautiful land. Well, what's that talking about? But God's beautiful land. It grew up to the host of heaven and caused some of the host and some of the stars to fall to the earth, and it trampled it down. It even magnifies itself to be equal with the commander of the host. Antiochus means the opposer. Epiphanes, have any of you ever had an epiphany? Means a manifestation. He encouraged people to worship his own person in the form of Zeus, and later assumed the title Theos, Epiphanes, God manifest. His coins had God manifest written on them. That's who he thinks he is. He thinks he's God manifest. Remember Alexander the Great, his distant relative of some kind, thought he was God. So he's like, hey, if he can be God, I can be God too, right? It even magnified itself to be equal with the commander of the host. That's talking about God himself, the host being the army of God. And it removed the regular sacrifice from him, and the place of his sanctuary was thrown down, and on account of the transgression, the host will be given over to the horn, along with the regular sacrifice, and will fling the truth to the ground and perform its will and prosper. 13 through 20 are Daniel's responses. I heard this, and I said, I need an explanation. You guys read the text. It's Greece in verse 21, verse 22, the broken horn and the 4 horns that arose in its place represent 4 kingdoms which will arise from his nation, although not with his power. Alexander the Great was great, and from then on, all of those nations will always, those 4, the kingdom of Greece, depleted in power and prestige. Verse 23, in the latter period of their rule, Antiochus Epiphanes was about halfway through. He's the 7th king or something like that. But it is in the time where they are really no longer a power. Antiochus Epiphanes is the guy that will go down, and he thinks he wants to beat up Egypt, specifically Alexandria. And so he goes down there, and he's going to go beat them up. And you know this story. The Roman consul sends their representative, and the Roman consul says, don't beat up Alexandria. And Antiochus Epiphanes said, let me go consult with my counselors. And they draw a circle around him. The representative of Rome draws a circle around him and says, you'll give me your answer before you step out of that circle. Well, that's where Rome decidedly became an international powerhouse not to be messed with for the next 700 years. But he got picked on. And when a big bad boy with a bad temper and very prideful, thinks he's a god, gets picked on, what does he do?
Somebody smaller.
Find somebody smaller. So he comes back through, he hightails it out of down here, and comes back up to right there. Meanwhile, there had been it's a chaotic mess. Okay, this is the Maccabees, they'll start, but it's just chaotic, absolute mess. And so when you read all of the prophecies about when they return, oh, it'll be wonderful, and so they're thinking it's going to be wonderful. When you read history, you think to yourself, no wonder. Yeah, it was conditional because these people are a mess. They're just a total mess. So we have the Pharisees and the Sadducees coming about at this time. The Sadducees being the sons of Zadok, the Zadokites. You ever read about them before? Right? The Pharisees, the word meaning separate. We are separate because the Hellenism is coming down. Antiochus Epiphanes, he just got kicked out of there, out of Egypt. So he comes back here and he wants to consolidate his rule. He wants to make sure that all the nations under him are actually unified. And how does he do that? By changing their culture. He does it by changing their culture. You can no longer sacrifice. The Sabbath was outlawed. You can't observe the Sabbath. He destroys the temple. That's another story for another time. And he wipes, he sacrifices pigs in the temple. He wipes pig fat on the walls of the temple. And so that gets all the other thing I preached about when the Sadducees and the Pharisees joined together to fight against rulers. That is one of the times they did. They said, well, we can't have this. We hate each other, but we hate him more, right? Okay. So this is Antiochus Epiphanes. The latter period, the transgressors have run their course. The king will arise insolent and skilled in intrigue. At one time he said, look, Jerusalem, I'm coming in terms of peace. My soldiers are coming, but we're coming to bring peace. They threw open the doors and he went in to kill 40,000 people in one day. His power will be mighty, but not by his own power, and he will destroy to an extraordinary degree and will prosper and perform his will. He will destroy mighty men and the holy people. So again, Daniel is learning, we're going to be beaten up. Our people are going to be beaten up. And through his shrewdness he will cause to seek to succeed in his heart, and he will destroy many while they are at ease, and he will even oppose the prince of princes, and he will be broken, but he will be broken without human agency. The vision of the evenings and mornings which has been told is true, but keep the vision secret, for it pertains to many days in the future. Then I, Daniel, was exhausted and sick for days. Then I got up again and carried about king's business, but I was astounded at the vision, and there was none to explain it. Daniel's prophecies. Daniel's got a lot of prophecies, and there's a lot of overlap. But Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 are about the Messianic kingdom. Daniel 8, which we read, is not about, it's about Antiochus Epiphanes. That's BC. That's about the national ethnic Israel. Chapter 9, national ethnic Israel. There will be some overlap. He'll refer to the Messiah in Daniel 9, but it's not really about the Messiah. It's not really about spiritual Israel. It's about the end of national Israel. Chapters 10, 11, and 12 are about ethnic. Again, it's going to be a lot of the same material. There will be some overlap. Some of it will take place in the time of spiritual Israel, but it's actually about national Israel. God is layering it on. Stew on this for a little while, I'll give you a little bit more information. This is, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, the first time anybody really realizes or is informed that national Israel is going to be picked on really badly. Because remember, Isaiah, when you return, it's going to be wonderful. Jeremiah, when you return, it's going to be wonderful. Ezekiel, when you return, it's going to be wonderful. Daniel, when you return, the wonderful things aren't going to happen right away. And you guys are in for something that when I tell you, you will be sick about it. Okay, I'm done. I have some points. Any comments or questions on what we looked at very quickly? George has a comment.
I have a question. Verse 11 of chapter 8. It became great, and the regular burnt offering was taken away, and the place was overthrown. And this is the point at which I got totally lost, because it felt like the narrative, the respect of the narrative, had completely changed. And a host will be given over to it together. Is somebody new talking here? I don't think so, because the quotation remains the same. But it's now looking forward. It seems like it's changed. It seems like it's part of the interpretation. The whole verse 12 just got me very confused. And I can't figure out what exactly is going on here. Why does it feel so different than verse 11?
Okay, verse.
One's showing the vision. 11 is continuing the picture. And then 12, it seems to be something in future will happen, as opposed to what is happening. I recognize it hasn't happened yet, past prophecy. So I'm way in over my head. I'm not, denying that, but I really get confused with the, and I can't figure out why.
Yeah, I agree that tenses do change. In the picture, he's describing the picture. A male goat was coming. A ram had two horns, was standing. Verse 8, the male goat magnified himself exceedingly. As soon as he was mighty, the large horn was broken. Verse 9, out of one of them came being past tense, which grew exceedingly. Verse 10, it grew, past tense, and caused, past tense. 11, it even magnified itself to be past tense, and it removed. Verse 12, and on account of the transgression, the host will be given over to the horn along with the regular sacrifice, and it will fling the truth to the ground and perform its will and prosper. My short answer is this: I don't think I'm going to have a satisfactory answer for you. That's my short answer.
Because
I think we'll leave it at that.
if I might add, verse 13 as well seems to revert back to Daniel's own observation without any punctuation to indicate that.
Yes, it did. Verse 13 is a change.
Well, where's the end of this? Somebody else is showing this to Daniel.
Yeah.
And these things are being said to him, but there's no closing. It's like when I send you an email and I leave off the parentheses.
Have you ever done that?
Every time.
Yeah, so
I
it
started
happens.
doing it on purpose.
My point is, the closest I can get to a satisfactory answer is that you've got to learn to adjust to it.
Okay. Flexible is what you're saying.
Yeah. Don't look for. Remember that a lot of this text is written in what? Without punctuation and run-on sentences as far as we are concerned. And so you need to think like that and use that as a backdrop when you come to this.
It is a little bit like, it's a vision. It's a little bit like you're watching a movie, you don't understand something, somebody hits pause.
Yes.
Because you say, stop that, pause, and they explain to you.
Right.
And so he's looked at, okay, here's what has happened, pause the thing, now verse 12. Because of all this happening, what else is going to happen?
Right.
But, it was looking back, and now the explanation looks forward a little bit more, even though the explanation that is looking back is still in the prophetic future.
Right.
Right. So, yeah, there's a lot of moving around in there, but...
Yeah, this is one of those things where you got to get the feel of it. That's it. And it's tough. Where do I stop feeling? What am I groping for? What am I feeling for? And that's why I'm hesitant to say any more, although I do have some more thoughts. Like, on the account of the transgression, the host will be given over along with the regular sacrifice. Okay. I said a second ago that even up until now, it's chaos. It's chaos in Israel. If you read, in fact, you can read it inspired. Read Malachi, right? Malachi says, you guys are a mess. That's referring to this time, right? It's referring to exactly this time. So you can read the inspired account where it's a mess. Verse 12 says, of transgression. It doesn't say the transgression. It doesn't label who the transgression is. I interpret this as on account of your sin. You guys are a mess. Look at Malachi. You guys are a mess. On account of your sin. If you hadn't been a mess, I would have protected you from Antiochus Epiphanes, but you guys are a mess. On account of transgression, the host, I know this is true as generally. I think this is what this verse is talking about. On account of transgression, the host will be given over. The host being not the army of God, specifically angels, which is often used of that, but God's people. God's people will be given over to the horn, which is added, I know, along with the regular sacrifice, and he will fling truth to the ground and perform its will and prosper. A little bit more information. The high priests were they were bidding for the high priesthood. Okay? So whoever had the most money was the one that would go to Antiochus Epiphanes, or the Ptolemaic ruler down in Egypt. I forget his name right now. Cassandra or something like that. I forget his name. And so they'd say, we've got the most money, give me the high priesthood. Is that how it's supposed to take place? No. It is so corrupt in Israel. It is chaos. It's disgusting. So what happens is, one guy who had the most money, he said to the Ptolemies down in Egypt, I want to be the high priest. Another guy came along and outbid him to Antiochus Epiphanes and said, so Antiochus Epiphanes is the ruler, and he says, no, okay, I'll take your money, you be the high priest. For the first brother, these two are brothers, to become the high priest, and he has an allegiance with Ptolemy. Well, then another guy comes along and takes money out of the treasury and goes and tries to get Jason, who had been in hiding, to be the high priest. Antiochus Epiphanes comes back from his little trip down here in Egypt. Meanwhile, in Israel, they're fighting with money to see who gets to be the high priest. One of them showing his allegiance not to Antiochus Epiphanes. When Antiochus Epiphanes comes back through, he takes a sword, he steals everything from the treasury, and he destroys a lot of the temple surrounding. Which sounds like, on account of the host will be given over to the horn along with a regular sacrifice, and it will fling truth to the ground and perform its will and prosper. What I just said, you might not have followed it, fits this. Whether or not it's actually what this is talking about, I don't know. There's a lot. I mean, you could almost plug anything for the last 200 years of Israel into this, and it's chaos. So, I'm sorry, I can't be... my only answer is to read it many times. And what you'll learn is God saying a little and a lot, and get what you can, and try to refrain from speculating, especially when you're up here. I do want to make this point. Daniel has a vision. I've made this point before. Daniel has a vision, right? Who in here would like to have a vision from God? I would. Even if the end of it required me to be sick for 3 days or whatever it is, that's I got to be careful what I wish for. But I mean, a vision from God, yes. And so you come out of that and you're like, hey, you're on a spiritual high, right? Just like camp week. You go to camp.
Come home from that sick 3 days too.
Kids a week, right? People are writing, oh, I loved it. We're home. It was wonderful. Well, what did Daniel do the rest of his life? You know what he didn't do? What?
Get another vision? No,
he did have some other visions. I thought you said get out of bed. Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food. Who wants that fun? Is that even fun? Not really. That's like, hey, you're limiting my choices. But by faith, I take it, he does this. Oh yeah, here's Daniel chapter 6. This is a fun one. Remember Daniel chapter 6 in the lion's den? Why is he in the lion's den?
Trickery.
Trickery. What were they looking for?
Accuse him
of
not following the king's decree.
And what couldn't they do? They could not accuse him of not following the king's decree, which reminds me of Romans 13 where it says, be subject to the authority. That's exactly what Daniel... No, it's a government, right? But here he is. He's just living by faith, and when the king says to do this wacky thing that I disagree with, well, he's out there doing it as long as it doesn't contradict what God says, right? That's living by faith. That he's doing, so he has this vision. Yeah, wonderful. He's got some really, he has the Spirit of God dwelling in him somehow to have him interpret these. Maybe I overstep by saying dwelling in him. I'm actually using Nebuchadnezzar's words there. whatever the case might be, he's doing God's work like we will never. But the rest of the time, he's obeying the speed limit or doing whatever it is. Husbands are told to live with their wives in an understanding way. Is that always easy, husbands? No. And don't get me wrong here, women. You're great. You're fantastic. Sometimes you're great. You're fantastic. It's huge. You're wonderful. Sometimes, and you can turn this around, but right now I'm talking to the men. Sometimes the wives need to be, I understand what's best for this. She doesn't see it. I've got to get her to point B. Is it fun? Husbands? No, it isn't fun. It's not fun. But that's what you got to do. Wives, from your perspective, you got to put up with this guy? Fun? No, not fun. But that's what you got to do. That's the living by faith. So camp was last week or 2 weeks ago or whatever it was. And it was really wonderful. Can't wait till next year. We got to do these things, whatever they are. James 3 talks about the tongue. You know, till camp next year, guess what I got to do? I got to work on my tongue every minute of every day. Corinthians 6 and a whole slew of other passages talks about fornication, adultery, drunkenness, anger, all these things. Camp's great, but now we're back in the real world, and we got to work on it. Matthew 7 talks about, Matthew 6 talks about don't worry about tomorrow. Yeah, that's faith, right? I'm not going to worry about tomorrow. You know, and we're all on the spectrum. Like some of us have no problem not worrying about tomorrow, and other of us, that's all we think about. We just focus on tomorrow so much that that's what we're focused on, right? So this is the living by faith. Okay, good. Some thoughts about dispensational premillennialism. First of all, do they look for a flying goat? How about a horn? Do they look for a little horn? They do not. They don't. So much for consistent. You open up their books and you'll read the same thing I just said. This is Babylon, this is Medo-Persia, this is Greece, and this is Rome. No, they'll switch that up a little bit, but they get it, right? Okay. Sproul, who is not a dispensational, chapter 8, verse 9, the little horn is Antiochus Epiphanes IV. This horn must be distinguished from the little one in chapter 7, verse 8. Just remember that. That's what I say to you. Chapter 7, verse 8 is a little horn in the fourth kingdom, which is talking about Rome. This one's in the third kingdom, which is talking about Greece. Okay. Schofield, on chapter 8, verse 5. The words horn and horns are used in Scripture, both literally and figuratively. I could sit down now, if you want me to. Consistency is nothing that they are concerned about. It's not. Schofield on 8:9, the small horn in this verse was fulfilled in the historical Antiochus Epiphanes. He is not to be confused with the little horn of 7:8. Yes, we agree with that. Who is yet to come in the tribulation period? No, we don't agree with that. Ryrie, not the same horn of 7:8, which will arise out of the we were talking about a few weeks ago. This little horn came out of Greece and refers to Antiochus Epiphanes. MacArthur on 8:9, the small horn is at Antiochus Epiphanes. Compare chapter 7, verse 8, where a similar little horn clearly represents the final Antichrist. Both are described as little horns is because one prefigures the other. Oh, thank you, Mr. MacArthur. There's only one problem. When Jesus quotes verse 13 in chapter 7, which comes after verse 8, Jesus says, right now, you're going to see this. We're in the fourth kingdom. The little horn's going to come out of this little kingdom. That's not the future. So Mr. MacArthur, he gets it here. He definitely adds here. One prefigures the other. Antiochus Epiphanes prefigures... No. Anybody who's ever said that? Not at all. But he's saying it prefigures whoever prefigured, right? Okay? So he definitely adds here. You don't read that anywhere, that these, and then this one is... Right, he's, all over the place. But again, this one right here, Schofield, the king. They're used both literally and figuratively. Okay, done. We can sit down, go on now. Comments or questions on this? Covered a lot of material in a short period of time. So, as much as we covered a lot of material there, chapter 11 is a lot thicker. But we will get there in a few weeks, I guess, Lord willing. Do you have Isaiah? Did you want to read Isaiah?
I was going to read the chapter of Genesis.
I don't necessarily want. We've been going almost an hour now. I think most people would probably like a song or something like that. Who has a song or something?
I'm down for leading singing. I give it a shot.
Okay, I guess that will be good.